Just so you know, there is some strong language and subject matter in this episode. Welcome to another episode of the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired. It's Trey here with you today. The Animal Liberation Hour is a podcast by Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM's mission is to grow and strengthen the animal rights movement by providing a space for activists to have access to a community and educational resources. From one-on-one mentorship to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM aims to empower humans to take action for animals so that the world will have more activists and we can achieve liberation sooner. For more information, visit animalactivismmentorship.com or our linktree, which you can find in the show notes. There you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism, donate so that we can continue this work, and keep up with everything AAM. Boy, do we have a treat for you today. I caught up with the legendary, the OG, Jerry Vlasak. Jerry has been in the movement for 3 decades, so he has a lot of wisdom to offer, and I am so glad that you're going to be here along for the ride. Jerry is a medical doctor, and his early work consisted of a lot of anti-vivisection work. He was involved in the Shat campaign, which you know about if you listen to our episode with Jake Conroy from a previous season. And he's a press officer for the North American Animal Liberation Press Office. And he's going to tell you a lot more about that. We talked about vulnerable industries that we can go after as activists to get wins. We talked about a little bit of animal rights history. We covered a range of topics, and I hope that you will enjoy this discussion as much as I enjoyed having it with Dr. Jerry Vlasak. Appreciate you joining me, Jerry. Thanks for being here. I wanted to ask you off the bat how and when you became vegan and got involved in animal rights.
About 30 some odd years ago, I was introduced to some of the concepts of animal liberation and animal rights after reading a couple of books, one by Tom Reagan, professor emeritus at the University of North Carolina, who had written a book called The Struggle for Animal Rights. And somebody gave me that to read, along with another book called A Diet for a New America, which was written by John Robbins, who was the son of the Baskin and Robbins owner. And both of these books talked about the animal suffering that was inherent in animal agriculture. And in addition, they talked some about the human health aspects and the environmental aspects, but it was really the animal suffering that struck me most poignantly. And I guess after having been alive on this earth for some 30 plus years at that time, I was really surprised that this had never occurred to me. I mean, things weren't quite as blatant back then before the internet and social media, so it wasn't sort of in your face all the time, but that's really no excuse. There's no reason not to have known where the food on our plate comes from. And I had just never taken the time or energy to explore that. And once it was put to me that this is what's going on, I just said, I don't want any part of that. And it was a very rapid decision. Within a few days, I was completely vegan. And within another few weeks or months after that, I was an animal rights activist because I just felt like I had contributed enough to animal suffering, and I wanted to try to ameliorate some of that by giving back and fighting against it. So that's sort of the origin story. Again, about 30, just a little over 30 years ago. And I've been trying to make myself useful ever since.
Yeah, I think nowadays a lot of times when you ask people how they went vegan, a lot of people say because of a documentary or they saw some footage or, something online. back then, around that time that you went vegan, would you say that was a lot of people's story? They read a book or something like that. Like, was that kind of common?
Yeah, I think books were just a lot more consistent source of information back then. There was no internet. There were movies, and there were probably movies that detailed animal exploitation. I just didn't come across them at the time. I was vaguely aware of animal liberation activities. The hospital where I was working at the time, in my training, had actually been attacked by the Animal Liberation Front probably 10 years earlier. And there were kind of rumblings around there about, don't do this, don't do that, make sure these doors stay locked, things like that. But it never really sunk in as to what they were talking about. It was just more of a said something in passing and had more to do with, how to behave a little bit around there. And it didn't, nobody ever took me aside and said, this is what happened and this is why it happened and so forth. So I guess I had the very vaguest idea that there were people out there looking after animals and trying to stop their exploitation and abuse. But I don't know. I don't know why. To this day, I don't know why that never sank in. Why I went 30 some odd years of life without ever occurring to me that animals were being exploited and that they could suffer and that we didn't really have any right to do that. Looking back on it, I just don't have any good explanation for it. And that's why I'm willing to cut people slack if they don't know or if they've never thought about it. But once they're presented with the facts and they know about it and choose not to do anything about it, I mean, not only not to fight against it, but just to stop participating in it by no longer eating animals or no longer going to circuses and rodeos or no longer experimenting on animals in laboratories. If they know about it and they refuse, and most people do, then I have no sympathy for those people. And I think those are the, I can't empathize with that behavior. But if somebody just comes up to me on the street, if I'm at a cube or something along those lines, and somebody just comes up to me and seems genuinely interested, then, I think I'm not going to hold them accountable for all the bad things they've done in their life. I'm going to say, hey, well, this is the way it is, and you have the power to change that. Yeah.
You mentioned when you worked at a hospital. So like when you went vegan and became an animal rights activist, did that create any problems for you when, in your career or anything like that? Did it create obstacles?
Surprisingly little, considering how active and involved I was. I did try my best to kind of keep my animal rights activism out of my work environment. I sort of just wore two different hats, if you will, and I'd go to work and I just mind my own business and take care. I would talk to people about plant-based diets from a health standpoint and say, listen, I don't want you smoking in the hospital while I'm taking care of you here. And I also don't think you should eat an unhealthy diet. We have all this evidence that this is an unhealthy diet. And so here's some information. I would usually give them some information from PCRM or some other scientific organization and say, here's the information. I'm going to recommend that you follow a plant-based diet while you're under my care here in the hospital. Obviously, you can do whatever you want to when you go home. But just like I have an obligation as a physician to recommend a healthy lifestyle and to prevent you from getting more sick than you already are. So other than that, I kind of kept the activism out of the hospital. It did cross into it every once in a while. Sometimes I would get arrested for helping animals, and it would show up in the newspaper or word would get around. Certainly, I had to report all that kind of activity on my licensure applications and renewals every year. But nobody ever really gave me a super hard time, with one exception, and that was when I went on a 60 Minutes episode with Rod Coronado and talked about animal liberation. That was widely circulated, and the hospital where I was serving as a trauma physician at the time saw that. Evidently, some people were unhappy about it that worked at the hospital or were involved in the board of directors or something. I'm not sure exactly what happened. And they basically told me to pound sand. They didn't want me coming around the hospital anymore. So I did lose that one position. I just sort of bummed around for a few months or a year, and then another hospital was more than willing to take me on board. And the hospital that I went to next actually was sort of a big fan of my activities at the Sea Shepherd Conservation Organization, and they actually liked the fact that I was out there working with this marine conservation group. And so and then after that, I never really had any more trouble. It was kind of that one episode over almost 25 years of working in the hospital and being an animal rights activist simultaneously. That was pretty much the only time it ever got in the way.
What year was that? Do you remember when you were on 60 Minutes?
It was early 2000s, Trey. I don't remember the exact year. I would say somewhere maybe 2003, 2004, 2005 at the latest, maybe. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, so was that kind of like at the height of the ALF and things like that? Like, what was the feeling surrounding that interview after it came out?
Yeah, there was a lot more direct action going on at the time. Rod Coronado, who had liberated thousands of captive fur-bearing animals and inflicted a ton of economic sabotage against the fur industry, had just gotten out of prison and was touring around and talking about animal liberation activities and how to get involved and that sort of thing. He and I were also working together on doing some hunt sabotage and things like that. So seemed like there was a lot going on then. I was active with Sea Shepherd at the time. There was quite a bit going on in the movement at the time. I don't know, 60 Minutes picked it up somehow, probably through Rod Coronado, and then found out about me as well. And the two of us were both on the show at the same time.
Yeah, so you're a press officer with the North American Animal Liberation Press Office. Can you tell us when that started, when you started doing that kind of work, and what is the press office and what's your role as a press officer?
In the year 2004, there was a break-in a laboratory at the University of Iowa, and 401 animals were actually liberated from the research facility. And it made some news, and the research facility was saying, oh, they're setting us back all these years in research, and no, these people were vandals, and they destroyed all this equipment, and they took all these animals, and who knows, these animals probably have diseases, and all these bad things are going to happen. And there was no one giving the other side of the story. There was no one telling the news media why this happened and who these people were and what their motivations and ideologies were. And there had been various press offices, animal liberation press offices over the years, usually just one or two people that were kind of operating, out of their parents' garage or something. And it wasn't real consistent, and they weren't, and at that time there was nothing going on. And so Steve Best, who's a professor at the University of Texas in El Paso, and I, who had been friends for a while, got together and said, listen, we need to do something about getting this message out to the media. So we formed the North American Animal Liberation Press Office. We held a press conference almost right away in Los Angeles. Probably a dozen people from the press showed up. We talked all about the University of Iowa raid and what had happened and why it happened, and that the animals were being well cared for. It basically presented the animal liberation side of the story, and got some media about that. So some of the media was willing to talk about that. So that's basically the main function of the Animal Liberation Press Office, is to deal with the mainstream media on behalf of people who are breaking the law to help animals and who can't deal with the mainstream media themselves, or they would, be risk getting arrested. So we act as an intermediary between those who help animals by breaking this unjust system of laws that protect those who abuse animals, and the mainstream media, who more often than not are interested in hearing the other side of the story. They're not as inherently biased as you might think they are. I mean, they are to some degree, but frequently we're able to get out the other side of the story as well. So that's one of the things that we do. We also educate amongst animal rights activists about what direct action is, what underground direct action is, about how these things work, how you become a member of the underground, and that sort of thing. So that's another function of the press office. We also do prisoner support. Every once in a while, somebody will break the law to help animals and get caught. It doesn't happen very often. There have been thousands and thousands of actions on behalf of animals that broke the law, and only a handful of people have ever been caught, and even fewer than that have ever gone to jail for any amount of time at all. But when it does happen occasionally, then we provide support for those people, let them know they're not forgotten, let them know they're not alone, send them money if they need it, write letters to them, encourage other people to write letters to them, and that sort of thing. So prisoner support is something that we do as well. So that's basically what we do. We if we find out about illegal direct action, we issue press releases and talk to the media about it. We educate activists on how they can get involved and what's involved in that. And then we do prisoner support when needed.
Yeah, that's extremely important work, because obviously these people who work above the law, they can't get in the media themselves and give interviews and talk about why they did this. And, like you said, if they do get caught, they need to know they're not alone. They need support. They need lawyers. They need money on their commissary to be able to stay vegan in prison or jail. So yeah, it's all amazing work. And Jerry's given some workshops through AAM that I would encourage people to check out that are more about the press office. You've always, in your animal rights career, been a big proponent of underground direct action. Can you just talk a little bit about why that's kind of the niche that you've gone into to teach people about and support?
Yes, I've always been a very pragmatic person. When I went into medicine, I looked at the things at how I could help people get well the fastest, and surgery for me was a solution to that. Instead of taking a pill for the next 30 years to fight your high blood pressure or your high cholesterol, with surgery, you say, okay, well, here's a problem. Here's the operation I'm going to do, and I'm going to fix it, and it's going to work. And so I was always just very pragmatic. And when I came into the animal rights movement, I looked at the animal rights movement and I said, what's the best way to get done what I want to get done? In other words, what's the biggest bang for the buck that an individual activist can have? And when I started looking into that, it looked to me like illegal direct action was the best way. I mean, it would help animals directly by liberating them if possible, and by inflicting economic sabotage on people who abuse animals for profit, that can stop them from doing that. And there's countless examples of people who have been attacked by the underground that have no longer been able to continue hurting animals, including animal experimenters that quit experimenting on animals, including fur shop owners that went out of business, including mink and fox farms that were raising animals to be annually electrocuted and made into fur coats that have gone out of business. There was a horse slaughter plant up in Oregon that was attacked by the ALF and burned to the ground, never reopened, and nobody ever replaced it as far as another horse slaughter plant goes. So there's innumerable examples out there of direct action that has made a difference for animals. And I still to this day believe that if any one person wants to be the most effective they can in helping animals that are exploited by human beings, illegal direct action is the best way. The second best way, I think, is something called targeted campaigning, which I learned about through the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty campaign back in the mid to late 90s. And that was a campaign to shut down an organization called the Huntington Life Sciences, which was the largest animal testing company on the planet. They were killing 500 animals a day, just testing things like oven cleaner and bleach and all kind of ridiculous stuff. And a group out of the UK decided to take them down. They had previously participated in taking down some other organizations that were hurting animals, dog breeders, cat breeders, primate breeders. And they had found a method where they would focus very, very intently on one company and just give them hell every day, day in and day out, and until they quit. And, you know, instead of being over here at the circus one day and at the butcher shop another day and, you know, something else, instead of kind of spreading their efforts all over the place, they honed in on one company, and they would pick a company that they felt was vulnerable. So it might not be in the meat and dairy industry, perhaps, because that may not be the most vulnerable point, but they found the vulnerable points. And that is, people don't like it when you breed cats and dogs to experiment on in labs. And so it was a very vulnerable place. And they went after those guys and they shut them down. And they stopped breeding dogs, and they stopped breeding cats, and they stopped breeding monkeys. And then they went after HLS, which was this big testing company. And so I saw that and I said, you know what, those guys are making a huge difference. And this is a very effective way of campaigning. And I got involved with them and stayed involved for many years. And then I tried to take the lessons learned in those campaigns and apply them to campaigns that are going on today. And that's what I'm doing in my spare time when I'm not doing the press office business.
Yeah, I mean, can we talk a little bit more about strategy? Because I think there's a notion in the movement from some people. I even thought this way. Some, you know, when I first came into the movement, just because of I don't know, like the temperature, like what was going on. But you know, a lot of people think those targeted campaigns are speciesist, and I think that's why people do one of the reasons why people do the kind of what you're talking about, jump at the butcher shop on this day and, you know, protest dairy this next day and things like that. But yeah, I don't think that, you know, I think the animals care about like what works, you know what I mean? So, you know, I feel like with these targeted campaigns that you're talking about, there's proof that it works. Now, I mean, it's possible that, you know, some of these other, you know, one-off protests might work towards something. It might work towards somebody going vegan. You know, maybe they're inspired by the protests, or, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that those protests are bad, but I'm definitely saying that, you know, I don't think it's speciesist to hone in on one company or one issue and try to change it. I'd love to hear, you know, your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree. I don't think it's speciesist at all. I think what we have to do is, I think we have an obligation to the animals to be the most effective that we can be. And I think if you look at the odds of you're closing a butcher shop by showing up out front with a sign once a week or something like that, and then going on to another campaign down at SeaWorld later in the week or something, I think you're less likely to make a serious difference there for the animals. And if you look for a weak link, a weak spot in animal exploitation, and you look at, as an example, the fur industry. The fur industry is on the ropes. Nobody of any importance is promoting fur. Nobody wears fur anymore unless you're, you know, a real anachronism, or you're just trying to, you know, poke somebody in the eye. Fur is very unpopular. 90% of the population is against wearing fur. They know that it comes from the immense suffering of a lot of animals. They know it's completely unnecessary. They may or may not know that it's also environmentally degrading. And but the bottom line is, most people are against the fur industry. The fur industry is on the ropes. They're losing money. So they're vulnerable. And I think you pick the industries that are vulnerable and you work there, and you're more likely to make a difference. And that's all I've ever cared about, is where I was most likely to make a difference. I'm not going to criticize somebody for doing other types of activism. Like you said, there are sometimes unpredictable and great results. But, you know, I've only got so much time on the earth, and I'm just going to try to use my time and my energy in the most effective way that I know how. And having looked around the animal rights industry, having looked at people that are working on legislation, having looked at people that are educating people about the horrors of factory farming. I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of that, but I just don't feel like it's the place where I can be most effective. And I think I have a moral obligation to be the most effective that I can. Targeted campaigning and illegal direct action are the two arms of the movement that I think are the most effective. Again, not to denigrate anybody that's doing other stuff, and sometimes we can all work together. So sometimes there could be legislative efforts that are paralleling direct action campaigns, or more often than not, the other way around. So there'll be a legislative action going on against, say, banning fur in the state of New York. Direct action can jump in and help out with that campaign, and targeted campaigning can jump in and help out with that campaign. And we all work together to abolish the fur trade in New York, like they, had some successes with in California, for instance, where it's now illegal to sell fur products in the state. So I think all of us can work together. But again, just as far as any one person goes, and as far as what I do goes, I feel like I'm doing the work that I think is most effective.
Yeah, that's a great point. Everybody's got a different role to play. And I personally agree with you. I think it's excellent when, a lot of different, I guess, factions, for lack of a better term, of the movement can sort of come together and all fight one industry or one entity, from all these different directions, from the political realm, from the direct action standpoint, from the pressure campaign standpoint. I wonder what the movement would be like if we could get that organized and focus on one or two things at a time, and we had the power of everybody in the movement all using their special skills or their kind of, world, their realm, to put an end to something. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that with fur, with the horse carriage industry. We're seeing some successes with animals in circuses that are forced to perform. We're seeing some, political victories with that as well. I just wondered what it could be like if we could all agree on something and all, put all of our efforts toward that, what it might be like.
Unfortunately, you may or may not realize this, but the vast majority of resources and money being spent is being spent on welfare campaigns to try to make the cages slightly bigger, to try to make the animals slightly more comfortable while they're exploited and before they're killed. And I don't necessarily agree with that strategy. I think it gives people a reason to say, okay, you know what, we did that. You asked us to make the cages 6 inches bigger. We made the cages 6 inches bigger. So get out of here and leave us alone now. And I think, welfare campaigns are, the most, unfortunately, they're the not from our circle of people, perhaps, but I think if you look at the overall amount of money spent in the world on campaigning for animals, that a lot of that time and money is being spent there. And I think if we were all to focus instead on these targeted campaigns and on this pressure campaigns, that I think we'd have more successes. But it's my opinion, and I'm not going to change anybody's mind, I don't think. But again, in choosing where to direct my own efforts, I look at what I think is the most effective.
Well, you might change somebody's mind. You never know. I mean, with this podcast, we have people on from all different kinds of backgrounds that come from all different perspectives, and we welcome all that conversation. And really, we feel like it's up to the listener of these podcasts to figure out, hey, like, which of these activists kind of like speak to them, and like which of these ideas speak to them, because like we said, everybody's got a different role to play, and everybody's got to kind of figure out what activism they think is most effective, not only in general, but for their particular skill set, or whatever that is. So I mean, I think it is possible you might change someone's mind on here. I tend to agree with what you're saying. I understand some welfare campaigns, for example, like maybe if they're trying to pass a law to slow down a kill line or something like that, that might hurt a company's bottom dollar, and they're not able to process animals as quickly, or or something like that. I think some of those welfare campaigns can be rooted in liberation, but yeah, I tend to be where you're at, an abolitionist, and just say like, hey, let's get rid of it all, you know?
Well, and it's incumbent upon us to look at the results. And I think if you look at, over the years, we're killing more and more animals in a lot of different industries. Circuses, not so much. And fur, not so much. I mean, the number of animals killed for their fur is a fraction of what it was 20 years ago. The stats for last year were just a little over 1 million, which is still a lot, but it's not 6 million like it was back in the early 2000s. And so I think if you can look back and you can say, well, where have we put the most pressure and where has there been the most illegal direct action? And hey, look at that, making a difference. Fewer animals are dying. And I agree. I mean, setting up a cube of truth and educating people about factory farming is a great way to get people to stop eating animals. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think you have to look at what's working. And for my money, I'd rather do something that I can see results. And that's just me.
Yeah, you talked about some of these more vulnerable industries. I know, like, in the early days of your activism, there was a lot of focus from you and others on vivisection, which, for those that are maybe not familiar with that term, basically, conducting horrible tests on animals. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. Did you decide to focus on vivisection back then? Was part of it maybe like your background in medicine, so maybe that was near and dear to your heart, or also, was it just things like the Shack campaign that were just kind of big and happening, and you felt like that was just something you could throw your weight behind?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of those factors. I think I saw a type of campaign that had been shown to be effective in the UK. And I said, I want to be a part of something that's been shown to work, that is working. The people were motivating and inspirational that I met that were involved in that campaign. And I felt like I had some sort of expertise and credibility by being a physician, that I could step up and say, I'm not somebody that doesn't know what I'm talking about. I've been there. I've seen that. I know what goes on. I know why they're doing what they're doing. And I know it's all bullshit. I know that the vast majority of all that data they're gathering, they're throwing away and never even gets published. And even the data they publish, the vast majority of that never makes anything better for human beings. And even the little fraction of information that they gather that ultimately does become useful for human beings, well, they could have figured it out lots of other ways and probably a lot faster and probably spent a lot less money on it. I mean, I don't think we really need to be addicting cats to cocaine, for instance, which is still going on to this day. Okay, it's been going on for 30 years and it's still going on today. I don't think we need to be doing that. I think we're wasting money that we could be using to help people that are addicted to cocaine. Okay, they're still doing maternal deprivation experiments. There's still some idiot in Boston that's taking little baby monkeys away from their mothers and depriving them of their maternal care to study who the fuck knows what. I mean, it's ridiculous and it's wasteful, and we're wasting taxpayer money by and large on doing ridiculous things to animals that are never going to help people. And we could be using all that money in such effective ways and not hurting animals in the process. And the science will catch up to that eventually. I mean, there's already the vast majority of people in medical research now are not using animals because they realize it's a dead end and that it's not going to make any difference, and that they could, they could do better work and get published in other areas. But there's still some people that are doing it. They've been doing it for 30 years and they're still doing it because they can get grant money and they can put their name on another paper and make their career look better. But don't make no mistake, they're not helping people, and they are hurting animals. And it's completely unnecessary. So career move, great. They've got a great career move maybe, but they're not helping anybody and they're hurting animals and they should be stopped. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's great how you just plugged yourself into that, and you being a doctor, you could plug yourself into that campaign in a way that I think brought credibility to campaigns like that. And that's kind of at AAM, that's kind of what we encourage people to do. We're like, use your special skills. I'm not saying you have to have a medical degree to get involved in anti-vivisection work, but what I am saying is, if you're a mechanic, I mean, maybe you can help a sanctuary whose farm truck is down, you know what I mean? Or if you're a photographer, I mean, there's many different ways you could use that skill to help animals and to support the movement. So, I feel like that's what you were doing during that time is, saying like, hey, I'm a doctor, I know what I'm talking about, and this is bogus.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has something they can contribute to the struggle, and whatever that is, then use whatever you have and try to be the most effective that you can. And if that's my one message for the day is try to be the most effective that you can. The animals are counting on it.
Yeah, and I think effectiveness for everybody looks a little different. So so we talked about vivisection. Then do you think the vivisection industry is as vulnerable now as it was then? And just if you want to talk about which industries you think are the most vulnerable right now.
Well, I think the vivisection industry is vulnerable. I think science is progressing. It's progressed since I started doing this. More and more companies are realizing they don't need to test their products on animals. More and more researchers are realizing that there's much more modern and effective ways of testing drugs and various things. And so I think the industry is eventually going to go away anyway because of all the scientific discoveries that are coming down the pike. But I also think it could use, a swift kick in the ass on the way out and, make it go away even faster. So I think it is vulnerable. It's also very well barricaded, if you will. I mean, there's really almost no vivisection lab that almost anybody can get into these days. So they won't even let journalists take tours and things because they know how unfavorable it's perceived by the public and how there are people that would do anything they could to stop it. So it's very well barricaded. All these laboratories are, behind steel doors, 4 stories underground and, with, a bunch of security guards standing around. So it's very hard to actually get into these labs. So it's very well barricaded, but it's still vulnerable in that there are still people who we know are doing this research and we know where they live and we know we can protest outside their homes, which has been and proven to be a very effective technique of not only exposing the atrocities that go on in these laboratories, but also intimidating and stopping these people from doing it. There were a number of researchers in the Los Angeles area that were targeted in exactly this manner, late 90s, early 2000s, and at least 2 or 3 of them quit experimenting on non-human primates because they just didn't want the hassle of people showing up outside their homes on Sunday morning or, things like that happening. There was, illegal direct action that was going on as well. So it was another case where the underground stepped in and supported a pressure campaign. There was a pressure campaign, in this case, against UCLA primate vivisection, and the underground stepped in and supported them. And it made life hell for a number of animal researchers out there, and some of them gave up. And it's sad that they have to give up because they're afraid of what might happen to them or because they're annoyed about people standing on their front lawn. It's too bad they can't say, oh, well, yeah, you show me how the science is all wrong and you showed me how I'm wasted all this money that could be spent to help people. So, yeah, I think I'll do that instead. But no, that unfortunately, some of them are so dug in that that's the only way they'll stop. But I don't think the animals care why they stop as long as they stop.
Yeah, what do you think it is that keeps that industry, going? Is it the only things I can really think of is obviously money. They're somehow, I don't know how they're getting, grants to do this type of like bizarre, unhelpful, bogus research, but is it also like a prestige thing. You know, I know like universities, I guess, maybe feel like they're more prestigious if, you know, they're doing this kind of what they sell as life-saving work. But obviously we know this work kills, and it's not very useful to humans either.
Yeah, the motivations are basically two. When you work for one of these universities, if you're a professor, a tenured professor, or something along one of these universities, there's two things you got to do. One is you got to keep getting your name published on papers to spread the word that the university can say, hey, look at all these researchers we have, and look at all these papers that are published. We're good. Give us some more money. The other thing is the individual researcher has to procure grants to pay for their research. So the researcher goes to the NIH, for instance, one of the big funders, and says, look, I've been doing this experiment on these monkeys for 20 years, and I'm just around the corner from coming up with something really useful. Okay, never mind that he said that for the last 19 years in a row. Okay, and never mind that nothing's ever come out of it. Okay, but in order to get that money, he tells people at the NIH that are doling out the money, he says, listen, I'm this close. If you cut off my funding now, I'll have wasted the last 19 years, okay? So send me some more money right away, okay? So then the NIH sends him a bunch of money at the end of the year. Well, of the money that comes to this guy, half of that money goes to the university, and they can spend it on janitors or buying a new building or something like that. They can spend it on anything they want, and then he gets the other half of the money to keep doing his research. Well, obviously, there's a huge amount of motivation from the university to say, Joe Blow here, keep getting that grant so that we can keep getting half of it to pay the janitors and pay everybody else that we want to pay. So if you don't get that grant, then you better go look for another job somewhere. Okay. So this is a simplification, but it's roughly what's going on out there. It's roughly the researcher telling the people that are funding him, look, I'm doing good stuff and I'm right around the corner from coming across something really important, and don't you dare cut off my money now, or, you know, we're all going to go to hell in a handbasket or whatever. And he gets that money and he gives half to whoever, you know, he's working for, and then uses the other half to keep on torturing animals. And he doesn't care. They just don't care about the animals. I mean, they know the animals. They see the animals screaming. They see the animals dying. They see all the blood and guts going on in there. They just don't care. It doesn't matter to them. It's just another way to make a living. And that's what they do. And then they certainly don't care about helping human beings. I mean, if they cared about helping human beings, they'd be helping human beings. Okay. I mean, I save people's lives every day that I'd go to the hospital. If you want to help human beings, there's lots of ways to help human beings, but taking baby monkeys away from their mothers isn't going to help anybody. And addicting a baby monkey to cocaine isn't going to help anybody. So yeah, they like to play the part of being the, you know, savior, the great white savior to help all these people out. But it's all baloney, vegan baloney.
Yeah. I don't know how those people sleep at night. I mean, they've got to know what they're doing is just so pointless and cruel. I was going to ask, you know, do you think fur is the most vulnerable industry right now, or something else?
I think the single most vulnerable industry right now is the fur industry. It's a lot of animals are dying needlessly in a completely ridiculous industry that is just not in the least bit supported by most of the general public. There's a few yahoos that are still out there trying to make a little money at the last minute by promoting the fur trade. People like Marc Jacobs and, you know, people at Louis Vuitton and so forth and so on. But they're a dying breed. They're not going to be around much longer. And like I said, if you look at the sheer numbers, the numbers are down. The prices for the animals are way down. They're actually at a point now where they're losing money every time they kill an animal and sell their skin. They're losing money. And I think that with a combination of pressure campaigns against the people who are profiting off the sale of these fur items, and a direct action campaign that goes after the people who are actually killing the animals, who are also very vulnerable because they live in rural areas. They have, because the profit margins are so small, there's not a ton of security. I think this is the ideal situation for a combination of underground direct action and pressure campaigning. And I think we're seeing real results. We're seeing designer after designer, retailer after retailer getting out of the fur industry. And every time somebody quits selling fur, every time Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue and Montclair and all the other companies, every time one of those companies says, okay, we're done, we're not going to sell any more fur, it's just another nail in the coffin. And for those of you that don't know about it, Final Nail, speaking of nails, finalnail.com is a website that has a list of all of the fur farms in the country. If anybody wants to get out there and do something about it, there you go, finalnail.com. Go to a fur farm near you. But there's the pressure campaigns such as the Coalition to Abolish the Fur Trade. I know AAM has been involved in that and is heavily involved in that. They're a pressure campaign that going against these retailers and against these designers to say, stop using fur. And until you do, we're going to make your life as miserable as possible. We're going to show up at all your fashion shows. We're going to show up at your stores. We're going to show up at your houses. We're going to show up everywhere and make your life miserable until you quit torturing animals to death.
So you've been in the movement for a long time. I've talked to so many people who have just like, hey, the first time I did this, Jerry was there, and the first time I did that, Jerry was there. I think you've just had a big influence on a lot of people that are still around in the movement, and I'm just wondering if you have any like crazy activism stories that like stick out to you that you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, I can't, nothing really sticks out in my mind. I mean, when I was involved in Sea Shepherd and we went up on the ice floes off the coast of Canada, and, people have been going up there every year for 20 years and taking pictures of the seals and taking pictures of the seals while they were being killed and so forth and so on. And when I went up there with Sea Shepherd, I got a few people together and I said, the hell with this. Instead of taking pictures of them killing the seals, we're going to go out there and like stop them from killing the seals. Okay. So we all trudged out there through a snowstorm onto the ice floes, and we stood between the guys with the clubs and the seals, and we said, not today. You're not gonna kill these animals today. And we were attacked for our efforts, obviously, and took a somewhat of a beating, not nearly the beating of the animals take, but and the RCMP shows up in their helicopters and their icebreakers and everything, and arrest all of us, of course, not the people that beat us up, but they arrested all of us for violating a law in Canada that says you can't approach within a half nautical mile of a seal killer while he's killing a seal. But we shut it down. We shut down that day anyway. We shut it down. And so, again, I've always kind of just looked at what works, and that worked for the day, and it got a lot of publicity. And the sealing industry is on the ropes. In addition, a lot of people are against that. They always have been, but now especially. But that's one story that comes to mind. You probably could tickle my mind maybe on some others, but that's what I can remember at the moment.
Yeah, you telling that story reminds me of something that was in recent news with those two activists, I believe. I didn't get to read as much about it as I would have liked, but two activists jumped on a whaling ship, I think in Iceland, and kept the boat from going out for the day. I forgot how long they were up there, maybe like 30-something hours or something like that. Did you read about that?
No, I didn't catch that particular one, but I know that Iceland has just recently resumed whaling after having had a moratorium on that for quite a while. And I spoke earlier of Rod Coronado. Rod Coronado crawled onto one of those whaling ships one time back in the 90s and opened up the flood valves on it and sank it right there in the harbor. Obviously, that boat didn't kill any more whales. So yeah, that was a great action that I remember, and one of the reasons that got Rod Coronado on my radar. But yeah, I think it's incumbent upon each person to go out there and find out where they can make a difference. And there's a lot of ways to make a difference, and it could be getting publicity for a particular cause. It can be doing things late at night, or it can be doing things during the day and making a scene. And I think there's a lot of ways we can be effective, and it's up to each one of us to decide with our particular skills and our particular knowledge and our particular state of being, what we can do, what we can do to help animals the most. And certainly not eating them is a good place to start. Becoming vegan isn't really activism, but it's a good place to start if you don't want to be involved in the exploitation, the torture, and killing of innocent animals. So becoming vegan is a starting point, but after that, it's up to everybody to decide how they can be the most effective. And maybe you're just really good with talking to people and convincing people to stop eating animals. Maybe you're really good at getting to know legislators and asking them to introduce legislation to help animals. Maybe you're really good yelling into a megahorn inside a Louis Vuitton store.
Yeah, exactly. I want to make a quick point to anybody who might be a newer activist or hasn't ever learned about security culture, but Jerry's able to tell that story about Rod Coronado doing something illegal because Rod Coronado got caught for doing that. So obviously he wouldn't be talking about it if he had not been caught. So what are, in your time as an activist, you said it's been 30-something years now?
Yeah, 30. I was vegan 30 years ago last February.
So in that amount of time, what are some of the biggest lessons or takeaways that you have as an activist, some of the biggest lessons you've learned or most important lessons?
I think it's hard to say, Trey, exactly what the most important lessons I've learned. I think that we have to just constantly remind ourselves of the amount of suffering that's going on behind the scenes, and be willing to get involved and think less of our own well-being than we do. And one of the reasons I think that there has been less activism, less direct action, and less vociferous actions in the United States is that people here in this country are so comfortable, and they're so their lives are so comfortable that they have so much that they're not willing to get out there and risk any of that. And that's why I think for so long we saw so much activism coming out of places like the UK and other Western European countries, where people were just not as tuned into that privilege and that culture of comfort, so that a lot of activists were perfectly comfortable in their situation of living off government dole and doing activism 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I think we learned, a bunch of us from the United States went over there and were inspired by these people and came back and sort of tried to emulate that. But I think that's one of the things I learned over the years. And the other thing is, I think just looking at all the tools in the toolbox that we have to help animals, and deciding which one of those tools you can make most use of yourself, and then making use of it and getting out there and making use of it. And that changes. I mean, the tools that I'm using today aren't necessarily the tools I was using when I started out. And, not everybody stays in the movement and continues working for animals as long as I have. In fact, most people don't. I've seen a lot of people come and go over the years. But even though those tools may change over time, I think it's important to keep looking and keep looking at new tools. And to imagine that we would use drones, 20 years ago, like a drone, and now we have tools like drones that we can use to survey fur farms with and see if the fur farms are still operating, and see if the fur farms, where their vulnerabilities are and what we can do about it. So that's just an example that the tools are always changing. And I think it's, important that you kind of just keep an eye on that and see, well, what's out there today that I could use to help animals. And that may not be the same thing that was out there 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think the point that you made about people being comfortable is really powerful, because when you think about other movements, you think about like Harriet Tubman, for example. She was fighting for her life, and then after she got to where she needed to go, she came back several times and was trying to get other people that she knew and loved, and also people that she didn't know, just people that were her people and that were people. She risked everything to try to get those people out, and she did get those people out. And then you've got, for example, like ACT UP and just the different movements from, the 80s and 90s, from when AIDS and HIV was, at its height. And these people were literally fighting for their lives and for the lives of the people around them. It probably seems so much more real and in your face, because it's right there. Like, the people that you're protesting with, one week they're beside you, the next week they're in the hospital, and the next week they're dead. It was kind of in your face. But with animals, they are not able to fight for their lives, at least in the same way that we are able to. Many animals do fight for their own lives. They jump off of a truck, or they do whatever they can to try to survive. But really it's up to us. It's up to humans to fight for them and to get liberation for them. And I think the animals are just up against such even more of a struggle, because there's no it's hard for them to represent themselves. I'm thankful for sanctuaries who have that platform for animals where they can. But I think you get what I'm saying. Like, it's just different, because it may not seem as extreme or urgent to a lot of people, because most of us are not sitting in the slaughterhouse watching an animal get killed, one by one, or in the fur farm. We're not sitting in the fur farm watching these animals pace around in circles 24/7. We are very comfortable. I'm very comfortable. I think all of us are guilty of that. But I think I'm glad that you said that, because I think it's important for us to all check our privileges and check our comfort level and challenge it. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, unfortunately, the struggle for animal liberation has sort of a built-in deficit, in that we're basically standing up for others that don't necessarily look like us or act like us. And some of us, like yourself and me, and maybe, a lot of the people that we work with, are able to empathize at the level that we really do see this as a life and death situation. But most people are just inherently self-interested. And if they're not only self-interested, but they're interested in other people that look like them. And that's why over the years, there's been so many struggles based on race and country of origin and all of these things, because, well, they're not like us, and we got to look after us. And it's hard to take that and transpose it on to someone who doesn't look like you and want to stand up for them, even though they're suffering horribly, unimaginably horribly. It's harder for people to get behind that. So even though our circle can get behind it, the people that we're dealing with can't get behind it. So they can't say, oh, well, they're just fish. Why are you worried about fish? Or why are you worried about, X? Because they're not like us, But in reality, they have enough like us. They suffer, they hurt, they feel pain, they have families, all of the things that we have. And yet, because so many people are speciesist, the term that maybe people are familiar with or maybe not, but the majority of the world is speciesist. They think, well, if you don't belong to my species, then you don't really count. Just like people used to be racist and say, you're not white, so you don't count. You're not, we can do whatever we want to. And we did. I mean, we did whatever we wanted to with people that didn't look like us, even though they were in the same species. So I think we're fighting an uphill battle, unfortunately, for that reason. And that's why the struggle is so difficult, and why it's taken as long as it's taken, and why why we're not seeing more successes. But we learn from the struggle, we learn from our successes, we learn from what works, and it's up to us to use that information to keep moving the ball down the field.
Yeah, and I think the other problem, is, I'm definitely like somebody who believes that animals, deserve their own movement and things like that. But I mean, all these injustices, in my opinion, really are connected. I mean, we could, if we weren't still having to fight like the things that, the Black Panthers were up against, and the things that MLK was up against, and the things that Malcolm X was up against, and the things that ACT UP was up against, and I mean, all these different injustices that still continue in some form or fashion somehow still here in 2023. I mean, if we weren't having to fight all those things too, maybe more people would be involved in animal rights. But there's so many people still fighting for their own rights in 2023, even in the United States, and definitely across the world and other places as well. So, I feel like it really is all connected in that way, and that's, I mean, it's unfortunate for the animals that in 2023 we still haven't, abolished all these other isms so that we can abolish speciesism too. And I don't mean that animals should be last on the list either. I think if we had a world where everyone was essentially vegan or pro-animal in some way, maybe that would help people realize, like, hey, I should treat everybody with respect. Like, if people were brought up learning, like, hey, let's take this spider and put them back outside, like if everybody was taught in that way about animals, maybe some of these other social issues would not be as prevalent even today,
Absolutely. And the problem is that things change. I mean, things get better and then they get worse again. I mean, you've mentioned ACT UP a couple of times. There was a ACT UP San Francisco group that was totally pro animal liberation, and we used to coincide and help each other out back in the 1990s, because they realized that time and money was being wasted on animal research when they and their friends were dying today. They didn't want more animals having various substances choked down their throats. They wanted to be helped by the government, and the government was wasting all this time and money on animal research. And they realized that, and they were 100% supportive of the animal liberation message. And yet now, I mean, a lot of groups now are so polarized against, fighting each other that they think Republicans are, a species from hell, or Democrats are a species from hell. They can't even empathize with other people that look like them. So we really see things kind of swinging back and forth sometimes. But you're right. I mean, listen, if everybody was brought up with an ideology that all life matters and that we don't step on spiders just because we don't like them in the house, well, they're probably not going to go out and shoot up a daycare center if they can empathize with a non-human animal. They're not going to go out and shoot up a bunch of kindergartners. So I think there's a lot to be said for that concept that you mentioned.
I didn't know about that group that you were talking about that was fighting against AIDS and HIV, but also an animal liberation group. I here in the past couple of years, I've learned about Move, who was based in Philly, and they were a group that was primarily Black, but there were other members of color and white members as well. But they were fighting for their lives a lot, but they also took in stray dogs, and they also fought for animals in other ways, and they protested the Philadelphia Zoo a lot because they could empathize with what those animals were going through, because they were going through that with their family members and their friends. So yeah, I mean, I think if we could build more coalitions like that, I think that's something that's really missing right now in the animal rights spaces. We got to build coalitions with other groups, because this is all connected, right?
It's hard work. It's hard work, though. I mean, I know that me and some other people, I mean, we tried to get along with the Black Lives Matter protest and things that happened within the last few years, and we tried to forge alliances with them and tried to say, yeah, we'll show up and fight against the oppression that you're experiencing. And at the same time, you can just kind of embrace some of the ideas that we have about not eating animals, or I don't know, just basics like not referring to cops as pigs and, things like that. It's hard work. It's really hard work. When one particular group is feeling marginalized and is fighting for their own lives, it's hard for them. And there are exceptions like MOVE and ACT UP. There are exceptions, but a lot of people aren't able to see outside their own struggle. And that's it makes the work very difficult, my experience over the years.
Yeah. And it sucks that they're even, in that position as well. Other than what we just talked about, what do you think the animal rights movement of today should be doing better?
Now, that's a good question. Since the early 2000s, me and others have always just tried to get people to, kind of focus our efforts on the vulnerable places that we thought we could be effective. And I don't know that we've been super successful in doing that. And I really would like to see more of that. And I'm not just saying that we all have to focus on the fur campaign, for instance, but I think if we could focus on the low hanging fruit, if you will, and do more of that. So I don't know, a recent issue that was in the news was the death of Lolita in a sea prison. And I think there's no excuse for keeping these animals in tanks for 50 years until they die. And I think that that's another vulnerable industry that we could be focusing on for people who either don't have access to the fur industry or don't care as much about the fur industry. So I think there are 3, 4, 5, 6 vulnerable areas that if all of us focused our energy on those areas, I think we could make a huge difference. And we are making some difference. I think we are doing that to some degree. I think we could see more of it. And again, I and others have been trying to push this message for, at least 20 years. And I'd like to see more of that down the road. If we could perhaps agree to disagree. I mean, everybody knows that factory farming is bad. Nobody's defending factory farming. But on the other hand, I think we have certain targets that are more vulnerable to our campaigning, and I think we should look at those.
And hopefully, by virtually ending those industries that are more low hanging fruit, like you said, hopefully that builds a consciousness with people. If that stuff's in the media all the time, and maybe even non-vegans get involved in fighting some of these industries as well. Hopefully it, slowly or hopefully quickly builds a consciousness. And not only that, but hopefully it creates a blueprint on how to end an industry. Until we can figure out how to get LVMH to go for free, I don't think we can figure out how to end factory farming by any means. But how some industries that I've seen tangible wins with lately are, fur, vivisection, horse carriages, pony rides,
foie gras. No, there's been some foie gras victories, is right. Yeah.
Yep, foie gras, puppy mills, things like that. Do you have any others to add to that might be low hanging fruit that you can think of?
No, I think those are all reasonable examples. Like I said, there's probably half a dozen things that we could that we have a real chance of doing away with in our lifetime. Well, maybe not mine, but yours anyway. Yeah, and I mean, I think those are great ways. Here, you might want to make a point of jotting down the time right now, because this is probably where you'll want to start editing it out. But I also think human overpopulation is one of the number one issues that we look at for animal suffering, and that I really am a big fan of looking at ways to limit human overpopulation. And I think the human overpopulation, which I don't think anybody can disagree that the human population is not overpopulated, but I think I think that we ought to look at limiting human population, because I think that that's ultimately going to be, that it's likely that that's going to be an issue long before we actually get the whole world to become vegan. And so it's something that people don't talk about. Not only in our movement, they don't talk about it very much. They certainly don't talk about it out there in the general world. But the bottom line is, as an overpopulated species, we're destroying the habitat of millions of animals. Thousands of species a day are going extinct. We're having a huge effect on animals of all sorts, and it's because there's just too many people on the planet. And I think we ought to look at ways of tackling that issue as well. And it doesn't have to be. I mean, unfortunately, it's a real trigger point for people. If you start suggesting to have fewer babies and not reproducing and practice birth control and so forth, you alienate a lot of people. And but I think it's important. I think it's something that needs to be discussed, just like we discuss all of these other strategies. And I think the single decision not to have a child as we get older makes a difference. And just like becoming vegan makes a difference, I think not reproducing makes a difference. And a lot of people don't want to hear that message, but I felt like I'm obligated to throw it in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't plan on having any, biological kids myself, partly for some of the reasons you brought up. But, I feel like the amount of people that we have could, live in a way that's just, it's just all the greed, right? It's like how we build all these huge houses and how we, the animal, everybody, probably most everybody knows this that's listening, but like with factory farms, think about how much water is used to keep all these animals that were bred into existence specifically to be exploited alive, and how many crops and how much land and how much pollution comes from that. And of course, like the human population affects that population as well if they're consuming that stuff, and if they're living in a way, just human existence at all is going to cause some kind of repercussions on the planet. But, I just think it's the way that we as humans live. It's just so greedy and over the top and just not smart in a lot of ways. Like, we're not even thinking about our own survival or the survival of, those that come after us. We're just not thinking about things in those terms. If everybody on the planet was vegan and just eco-minded, then maybe overpopulation wouldn't be a problem. But it's just not that way.
Well said.
Well, I have one more question for you, but before that, do you have anything else you just want to add that we didn't get to cover?
Anybody wants more information on what I do at the press office, and I'm not the only one, there's other press officers, but animalliberationpressoffice.org on the web, Animal Lib Press Office on Instagram, and you can learn more about what we do and get in touch with us if you want to help us out.
All right. With that, I'll ask you one final question. And you've given plenty of advice throughout this interview, but I do want to ask, in case we haven't covered anything else you want to talk about, what advice do you have for any brand new activists that might be listening? You know, AAM, we try our best to bring new activists into the movement, and we hope that those activists are listening to these podcasts and, you know, watching our workshops and the talks that we do on YouTube as well. And from somebody that has as much experience as you, I would just love to hear what advice you might have for somebody who's just getting started.
If anybody's just getting started and wants to become active in the struggle for animal liberation, first thing you should do is get in touch with Trey over at AAM. I have a huge amount of respect for animal activism mentorship. They'll show you the ropes. They'll show you what's out there. They'll show you ways to be effective. They'll hold your hand until you feel comfortable doing what you want to do, and then it's up to you. And then you can. I urge each and every one of you that are interested in helping animals to find out what you're good at and do that and help animals in the best way that you can find out. And a good way to get started is through AAM. They'll introduce you to all kinds of things from public education to protesting to targeted campaigning to every aspect of the struggle for animal liberation. And then you can make a decision. It took me a long time to learn what all was out there and what everybody else was doing and what the options were that for me to become the best I could for animals. So get involved with AAM, visit our website, see what makes sense for you, and then get out there and get busy. And remember that the animals are counting on us.
That means a lot coming from you, Jerry. We certainly appreciate it. We appreciate that you're involved, with AAM when you can be. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say thank you for all of your work over the past few decades, everything you've done for the animals and everything you continue to do. We appreciate it, and thanks for taking some time to transmit some of that knowledge to others today.
I appreciate you being out there too, Trey. It's been great working with you these last couple of years, and I'm looking forward to more of the same.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Jerry Vlasak and hope that you will follow the North American Animal Liberation Press Office online. And please take a quick minute to rate and review the podcast. It helps others find it more easily. And the more people that find it, the more people can be inspired by the guests interviewed on our show and turn that into actionable change for the animals. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Our channel has educational workshops, talks, and other inspiring and informative content that you will not want to miss. At AAM, it's important to us to offer our content and resources for free so that it's accessible for everyone. If you like the podcast and all of the resources AAM has to offer and are able to support us, please consider a one-time donation or becoming a monthly patron. It all helps us keep going. To make a donation, you can use our Linktree, which can be found in the show notes. You can also use the Linktree to keep up with AAM on social media, visit our bookshop, visit our merch store, and keep up with everything AAM. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. If you needed a sign that you should be an activist for animals, this is it. Remember that it will take all of us to achieve animal liberation. Stay focused, be effective, and keep doing your part. Until next time.